The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father loves me, so I also love you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and your joy might be complete. This is my commandment: love one another as I love you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer call you slaves, because a slave does not know what his master is doing. I have called you friends, because I have told you everything I have heard from my Father. It was not you who chose me, but I who chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit that will remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. This I command you: love one another." The Gospel of the Lord. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of power in this gospel, and I don't know that we see anywhere else in the sacred scriptures where Jesus is more forceful than he is here. And it leads me to think that we ought to be paying attention to what he's saying. And yet when we think about all the many things that Jesus taught, all the many things he said and did, how often are we reminded of this in particular? That he has commanded us to love. Commanded us to love. This is his commandment, that we love one another. There's a lot of power. It's a massive challenge. There's a massive challenge in this gospel. We've also got a great consolation. Whatever you ask the Father in my name, he'll give you. And we've got to understand what is the context here that allows us to both receive perhaps the most difficult challenge that we'll ever receive, and that we will be provided with the richest or choicest blessings of God in the process. Well, this passage comes directly after the passage that we heard last week, the vine and the branches. And I'll do a quick summary. Pray God, I'll do a quick summary of that to give some sense of the picture frame that belongs around this scene today. Jesus has just said, "I am the true vine." And it's not an image that he weaves out of whole cloth, right? It's not an image that he creates on the spot. The image has roots in the scriptures, in the Old Testament, where we see that Israel is the vine. Israel is the vine of God. But to understand that, we've got to go back to the beginning, right? So God creates everything that exists. He creates the world, and he sees that it's good. And yet, shortly following on from God's good creation, we see human rebellion that brings into the world, into God's good world, the rule of sin and death, right? The corrupting forces of sin and death. And God doesn't sit back and say, "Well, you know what? That's okay, fine. Let it play out. Let's see where this goes." No, he doesn't do that at all. Instead, he calls a people to himself to put the world to rights. He calls Israel to himself to be a nation through which he would bless the world. Right? God will bless the world through Israel. And yet we see in the scriptures the story of Israel, try though they might, they couldn't overcome themselves. They couldn't overcome their self-concern. They couldn't overcome self-indulgence. What God gave them, they used for themselves. They used for their own agenda. And so what does God do? He sends his only son. He sends his son to be Israel at last, and to call a new people to himself, so that in God's new Israel project, finally his blessing would reach every corner of his creation. He will renew the face of the earth through his new chosen people. So that's what Jesus has just finished telling his disciples. And now he gives them this. Right? He tells them, this is my commandment. So in the context of Jesus' new renew the face of the earth mission, in the context of Jesus' new Israel mission, he is telling his followers what the power of that mission is going to be. What will the strength of this mission be? And it's nothing other than love. Nothing other than love. This is where we start. This is where we start. This is where we end. This is where we start when we look to renew the face of the earth. When we look at it, so look at this. There are many people here. I won't count for the sake of the governor. I won't count how many people, but as many people as are here, I could imagine we could have conversation about what's wrong with the world. What's wrong with the world? And every one of us will have a little bit of a different view of what's wrong with the world. And then I'd ask a bigger question. Right? What can we do about it? What's wrong with the world? What can we do about it? Now, the challenge is that as a Christian people, we have one narrative for that. We have one story for that. But are we living into it? Are we making it our own? Or do we have another story, depending on other things, right? But is God's story our story here? What's wrong with the world? Human rebellion, sin, the corrupting power of death. What has God done about it? He sent his only Son to live the way of self-gift, to live love, to be love in the flesh, and to die under the weight of the corrupting forces of sin and death, and so rise freed from those shackles to give his people that same freedom to live in the love of God and bring his love to life where they are. That's our story. What's wrong with the world? Me. What are we going to do about it? I'm going to turn my heart and my life over to God. To live the way of God-centeredness and other-centeredness. Because left to my own devices, I'm selfish. It's about me. I live a life of self-concern and self-indulgence, just like Israel of old, right? I fit right in there. But no, God is at work to do more. God is at work. In fact, we say, what's wrong with the world? You can look outside if that's more comfortable for you. You don't have to look so close at yourself right now. You can look outside and say, what's wrong with the world? We see that it's the influence, the world gone awry, right? The sin, rebellion against God. Everyone looking out for himself and the rest. But God wants more. God wants more for his wounded world. And his Renew the Face of the Earth mission begins with Jesus and continues in and through Jesus' faithful followers. And that's the whole point of what Jesus is giving us. And here we see there are any number of rich challenges and consolations in the passage, right? We see, I have told you this, the commandment to love one another. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy might be complete. Do we want joy? Do we want joy? Joy is only going to come by living outside of ourselves. It's only going to come by giving ourselves away. It's not going to come from self-indulgence. It's not going to come from that extra Oreo or Cheeto. Sorry to ruin it for you, but you're not going to get there. You're not going to get there. It's not going to come from the next worldly success. It's not going to come from more power, pleasure, comfort, and all the rest. It's going to come from giving yourself away. It's not going to come from what you're going to get. It's going to come from giving, living in the love of God. Right? How strong is this challenge? Remain in my love. Love one another as I love you. Love one another as I love you. Can you feel the challenge of that? That's what it looks like. Look at Jesus. Look at Jesus on the cross. Love one another as I love you. That's our goal, my friends. That's our aspiration. But that has to be our reality. We won't get to the joy that Jesus promises except by going his way. And we have to go his way all the way to the end. Give ourselves away in service of God and for the good of people that he causes to cross our path. My friends, who have we failed? If this is God's mission, this is the way that God is going to renew the face of the earth. This is the way that God is going to bring life and vitality back to his creation. Where have we done it and where have we not? This is our calling. This is what we live for. And in God's plan and purpose, he has us in our corner of creation to bring life back to his wounded world by the power of love. Are we doing it? Are we following him? Are we living out this relationship of loyalty and love to Jesus? And as I said, of course, I could sit on this because this is it, right? This is it for us as Christians. There's nothing else. There's not another checklist here. There's not another way to prove yourself, right? In fact, we can't do this on our own. The only thing we have as Christians is to love one another, is to bring God's love to life. Are we doing it? And of course, if we feel how overwhelming that is, if we start to think of the people that we have not shown the love of God to, then my friends, we're in good company. And God is stirring our hearts to see that. Because we can't do it. Again, left to our own devices, we're going to be trapped in self-concern. But in Jesus, and by the power of his own life of love at work in us and working through us, we can live the life of self-gift that he calls us to. We can truly love one another. And if we feel too flat, we have the great promise here at the end of this passage. Whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. Right? Because Jesus has chosen us. We have this saying in seminary, right? In some pious circles, you may have heard it as well. God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. God does not call sorry if you thought you were equipped for this, but God does not call the equipped. He equips the called. And this is exactly what Jesus is saying. That it was not you who chose me, but I who chose you. And because Jesus has chosen us to take up our share in his Renew the Face of the Earth mission, he is going to equip us as well. And wherever we find ourselves falling short on that challenge to love, he is there to give us new strength. I do have to say just one word in recognition of Mr. John Corter. It's great that we're celebrating your first Holy Communion today. What a great gift it is. And I'm sure it's special for your mother as well to have this on Mother's Day. And of course, the May crowning. You're never going to forget this day, okay? We're building it all up for you. But how good it is, and how good it is for us to see all of our first communicants here today who are going to help us crown the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, because you remind us of how significant communion is in this reality. Right? We know that we can't go it alone. Right? We see this promise lived out day in, day out as Jesus gives himself to us in the Eucharist, as he gives himself to us in Holy Communion. We need not doubt that we have the strength or power to live the life of love that God has called us to, because he gives us his own blessed life. From his own hand, he gives us his body and blood so that we can be truly his body in the world. Now, so, I don't know, we'll finish with this. We may have slightly different opinions on what's wrong with the world. But the world's solution is at hand. It's Jesus. It's just Jesus. We entrust ourselves to him. We offer ourselves to God through and with and in Jesus today, in this offering of the altar, so that we can receive Jesus and become Jesus for God's wounded world.